right, we'll call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the July 18th, 2024 meeting of the Minnetonka Planning Commission. The Commission generally meets on the first and third Thursdays of the month. The schedule and tentative agendas can be obtained by calling the Planning Department or by checking the city website at minnetonkamn.gov. The Commission holds public hearings on land use applications. From a specific process standpoint, that means we make recommendations to the City Council on rezonings, subdivisions, conditional use permits, and amendments to the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations. We also make final decisions on site plans, signage requests, and variance requests, and expansion permits, unless these requests are part of an application that must be heard by the City Council. In that case, the Commission makes a recommendation, and the Council makes the final decision. The city notifies property owners within at least 400 feet of the sites, posts signs on the properties, and places notices in the Lakeshore Weekly News and the Minnetonka Memo. Any aggrieved party may appeal a final Planning Commission decision to the City Council. If you wish to appeal, you must submit a written request to the city within 10 days of this meeting. From a broader standpoint, the city's comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance, and subdivision regulations are the city's best efforts to codify a balance between individual rights and community responsibilities. Individual rights are easy to understand. Community responsibilities are more subtle, but the idea is that we, as members of the community, agree to limit our individual rights for the common good of the group. The Planning Department, the Planning Commission, and the City Council are charged with managing this sometimes difficult balancing act. We ask you to keep this broader perspective in mind as we review tonight's applications. Again, welcome. Staff, please call roll.
Minion.
Here.
Waterman.
Here.
Banks.
Here.
Hanson is absent. Henry.
Here.
Maxwell. Here. Chair Sewell.
Here. There are 6 of us seated here tonight. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda, and I believe there's a change memo.
Chair, that is correct. There's 2 changes on the change memo. The first is actually to the agenda itself. Item 8A just has an incorrect date for the council consideration. That will be going to council on August the 5th in conjunction with the liquor license that's being requested. And then item 8B, we received some revised sign plan drawings for the sign plan request. The height of the sign is shown in those revised drawings as increased by 1 foot from 4 feet originally shown to 5 feet as shown now. That 5 foot does reflect what was approved on the building immediately to the east.
All right, thank you. Recognizing the change memo, would someone like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Motion Henry.
I'll second.
Second Waterman. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next is approval of minutes from the June 20th, 2024 meeting. Commissioners, any changes to that, to those minutes? Doesn't look like it. Then I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll motion we approve.
Motion Banks.
Second.
Second Minion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is item 5, report from staff.
Chair and Commissioners, 2 City Council meetings since your last meeting to report on. The June 24th Council meeting, there were 2 agenda items that the Council considered. First was a conditional use permit for the accessory dwelling unit on the mall. That was the conversion of that existing detached garage into an accessory unit. That was approved on the consent agenda. And then the items concerning the Wells Fargo redevelopment, again, the removal of the existing Wells Fargo office building and bank on Plymouth Road and redevelopment of that site. And that was approved per your recommendation with all of the conditions that you recommended. And then on July 8th, it seemed that most of the items on the agenda were related to the Planning Commission action items. There were some conditional use permits for, again, an accessory dwelling unit on Brown Lane over the existing garage, the floodplain alteration permit for a swimming pool, the conditional use permit, I should back up, those were approved on the consent agenda. As was an ordinance rezoning the property on Covington Road. You actually heard this last summer. It was an existing single-family home zoned R1. It was right next door to the Minnetonka Heights apartment building, which is zoned R4. The existing home was zoned R1. Minnetonka Heights had purchased that home. They requested a rezoning so that they could remodel that home and use it for office purposes. They actually paused that request while they considered maybe what else they could do with that property. They looked at a lot of other things, but then they came back and said, yeah, we just want to move forward. So that, you did hear that. It's just been a year in time. Then the council introduced an ordinance for the Amira Villas townhome project. You just reviewed that concept about 2 months ago, just south of the Amira apartment building. That will be back before you for actual development consideration sometime in August. So that was introduced at the council. And then the two primary items on the council agenda was the CUP request for Les Schwab Tire. The applicant actually decided to request postponement of that item after the council discussed it. The council did feel that the use was appropriate, but they asked staff and the applicant to look at potential other sites on that larger site. And so staff and the applicant will be doing that. And then the preliminary plat for 1 Acre Oaks, the council comments really reflected everything that the Planning Commission also said, but that was approved by the council at that meeting. And then just for information, public service announcement, if you had not been following the lawful gambling consideration, that was also approved by the council. So pull tabs coming to your local Minnetonka establishments. That is my update. Your next meeting will be August the 1st.
All right, great, thank you. Commissioners, anything to report? The other thing I have to report is just want to say thank you to the city and the staff in particular for putting on a great boards and commissions dinner last night. On behalf of the Planning Commission, we appreciate their recognition, and special shout out from the mayor recognizing all the hours that we put in as a body, and some of us put in even more on additional boards and commissions. So we are well represented at the dinner and all the work that we do. So just want to say thank you. It was a great event, and I was enjoyable. So thank you to city staff for that. All right, let's move on to...
Sure, if I could add one more comment to that one,
please
too.
Jump in.
As evidenced by our well-represented commission last night, we had 6 of the 7 commissioners there, which was by far the highest turnout of any of the commissions. So I think it embodies our commitment to helping out the city and its citizens.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. All right, moving on to item number 7, which is the consent agenda items. These will be items that will pass in one motion unless someone would like to pull an item and have a full, complete discussion on it. Otherwise, we will move forward with that. The items for consideration tonight are recommendation the city adopt the resolution approving the request for an expansion permit and front yard setback variance for additions to the existing home at 3500 Moreland Road, and approve a minor amendment to an existing master development plan for an elevator shaft addition at 5995 Opus Parkway. Commissioners, would anyone like to pull either of these items and have a complete discussion? No? Anyone in the audience like to pull either of these items and have a full discussion? Doesn't look like it. All right, then I think we're probably ready for a motion. Would someone like to make a motion to approve those 2 items?
I'll make the motion, Chair.
Thank you. Motion Maxwell.
I'll second.
Second Minion. Staff, please pull the commission.
I'm working a lot of computers here. Just 1 minute.
No worries.
Okay. Minion.
Yes.
Waterman.
Yes.
Banks.
Yes.
Hanson is absent. Henry.
Yes.
Maxwell.
Yes.
Chair Sewell.
Yes, motion carries. And both those items are final decisions subject to appeal within 10 days of running of this meeting. So good luck with your projects. All right, before we move on to item number 8, non-consent agenda items, I'd like to review the steps in the process and the public hearing procedure that will be followed for each proposal. First, the item will be announced and staff will report on the subject. The commission will then ask questions. Next, the applicant will be invited to make a presentation or offer any comments. Commissioners may ask additional questions at this time. After the applicant is finished, the public hearing will be open to give anyone present the opportunity to comment on the proposal. If you wish to speak, please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. We ask that you keep your comments brief and try not to repeat points already made. All right, the public hearing will then be closed and no further comments will be allowed. The commission will discuss the proposal and make a decision. The first item on tonight's agenda is item 8A, a conditional use permit for a restaurant with an on-sale intoxicating liquor at 17623 Minnetonka Boulevard. And this is a recommendation that council adopt the resolution approving the permits. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. This first site is located in what we generally refer to as the Mini Haven Mall, which is situated in the southwest quadrant of the County Road 101 Minnetonka Boulevard intersection. In 2018, the city approved a conditional use permit for Nautical Bowls to occupy as a restaurant space within Mini Haven Mall. And a few years later, Nautical Bowls vacated that space, moved to the building on the property to the south, and El Travicio Taqueria occupied that same space under that same conditional use permit. In 2013, then, the city received a CUP essentially for a change in just the type of restaurant, the same ownership, but the menu items, the type of restaurant changing in that same space. You, as a planning commission, reviewed that request. You recommended approval of the request, but the applicant chose not to move forward before it was ultimately approved by the city council. And so now, here we are in 2014, and we have essentially what is the same request that came before us in 2023. New ownership, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, but El Bodegon is proposing to occupy this same space, but essentially change the menu from a taqueria to a tapas bar, serving small plates as well as beer and wine. So they've applied for a liquor license. That triggers just a different conditional use permit than is already existing. So this review is the same that we looked at last year, just with a different restaurant name and a different restaurant owner. As we did last year, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit because it would meet the conditional use permit standards. Also, it would meet the parking standards, which have not been changed since the last time we reviewed this. And so I, again, recommend your approval that you recommend to the City Council, and I would turn it back to the Chair.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff? I think bullet point number 1 kind of sums up a lot of this. All right. I think we're probably ready. If the applicant would like to come forward and offer any comments or presentation, you can. Otherwise, you don't have to. All right. I guess not. Then we'll open the public hearing. If anyone has any comments on this item, please come forward. Doesn't look like it. Then we will close the public hearing. We're cruising here, folks. Commissioners, any comments? Or we don't have any questions. Otherwise, I think we're probably just ready to move. Right? Would someone like to make a motion then? I think I'm just taking a pulse and a gut check here. I think we're probably ready for approval, but you can make whatever motion you want. But I think we're probably ready for a motion to recommend that council adopt the resolution approving the conditional use permit for a restaurant with on-sale intoxicating liquor at 17623 Minnetonka Boulevard. Would anyone like to make that motion? Motion Minion?
I'll second.
Second Waterman. Staff, please poll the commission.
Minion?
Yes.
Waterman?
Yes.
Banks?
Yes.
Henry?
Yes.
Maxwell?
Yes.
Sewell?
Yes, motion carries. And this is a recommendation that will be heard by the City Council on August 5th. Good luck with your application. All right, moving on to item 8B, amendment to the sign plan for Crescent Ridge Corporate Center as it pertains to 11100 Wayzata Boulevard. And this is a recommendation to adopt the resolution denying the amendments. And Ms. Thomas, this is your item again.
Thank you again, Chair. The Crescent Ridge, Corporate Center is a 24-acre development situated at the northeast corner of Hopkins Crossroad and 394 interchange. The sign plan that was originally approved for the property back in 1999 allowed for one wall sign per building, which is consistent with city code or sign ordinance, and allowed for 4 freestanding signs on the site, two of which are development-related signs, and 2 of which at the main entrance allow for tenant identification. In the summer of last year, the owner of the property on the east side, 10900, applied to the city for an amendment to allow for a second wall sign on that building. These properties are under separate ownership, so that amendment applied just to the easterly building. Staff did recommend denial of that amended sign plan for a couple of reasons. First, we thought that it would be contrary to really the city's philosophy with regard to sign, that too many or too big signs, particularly on office buildings, really detract from the aesthetics in our community. Second, that this sign plan already allowed for much more identification than is typically allowed in the sign ordinance. And third, that it would set a precedent for other office buildings in our community. The Planning Commission disagreed with that and did approve the sign, finding that there were some unique situations going on here. The building was very large. It was on 394, and the tenant was the second largest tenant in the building. Now, this year, the owner of the westerly building, 11100, is essentially requesting the same amendment that was approved last year to allow for a second sign. I'm showing on this screen what was approved for, again, the easterly building and what would essentially mimic that on the westerly building. As we did last year, again, for consistency, staff is recommending denial of this project. We continue to believe that tenant identification on office buildings is really difficult because office tenants are constantly changing, sizes of tenants are constantly changing, and drawing that line becomes difficult. We do believe that this property already has excess of tenant identification, and this is really contrary again to our philosophy. So with that, I would turn it back over to the chair.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff? Yeah, Commissioner Waterman.
I have a few things, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Thomas. Couple data points. The Alaris space in the new space in the 10900 Wayzata, do you know how many square feet that is?
I'm not certain. I could go back to the previous proposal. I can find that in the old report, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks. Second, refresh my memory. Do we have a lot of office buildings this size in Minnetonka?
Chair and Commissioner Waterman, on the 394 corridor, these are probably the second largest office buildings on the 394 corridor. Obviously, the Carlson Towers are the largest. Across the street, the Crest Ridge are slightly smaller than this. So I would say along this corridor, probably not. In Minnetonka, our larger office buildings are probably in the Opus area.
Okay. And are those, the ones in the Opus, are there ones that are this size, like 200,000?
Certainly,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then lastly, this is sort of a hypothetical, but this application is not for a specific tenant, nor is there a lease. So hypothetically, if we were to concur and this gets rejected, is it then done? Could the applicant reapply?
Chair Sewell and Commission, yes, this applicant can always reapply. Some communities have written into their ordinance that when an application is denied, there's a cooling off period of a year. Minnetonka does not have that in our ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Banks.
Thanks, Chair. Do you recall when we met about this previously, were there any conditions in terms of we knew that the tenant was going to be Alaris, they were moving from one side to the other, but were there any conditions imposed with that approval by this committee in terms of like square footage of size or anything of that nature?
Chair and Commissioner Banks, let me pull up the approval specific. The only conditions were that the wall sign could be no larger than 5 feet, and it had to be located in the position here. And it was based on, again, your findings were that the building was over 200,000 square feet in size. The tenant was the second largest tenant in the building, and the property was situated on the 394 corridor. Those were the reasons. But I will get you what the tenant size was. I'm flipping through reports here.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for staff? One question I have is, it's the two buildings together are 200,000 square feet, or each side is 200,000?
Actually, the building,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, Chair, the building on the west is the smaller of the buildings. It's 275,000. The building on the east is actually 310,000 square feet. So both buildings quite large.
Okay, got it, thank you. All right. You can look at that and maybe follow back up with us when we go to comments, if that works for you. All right, and I think we have the applicant on the phone. Oh, you're even better. It's even better than having you on the phone. Come on up, and if you can give us your name and address for the record, and welcome.
Do you need my personal address or the building?
Building is fine.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
My name is Ashley Lair. I'm with Cushman and Wakefield. I'm the general manager of Crescent Ridge 1 at 11100 Wayzata Boulevard. So as stated, our neighbor and sister building, Crescent Ridge 2, who is separately owned, leased, and managed, was recently approved for a second sign. Alaris, which is our current tenant, they're 21,000 square feet in our building, and they are now relocating next door. As we work to backfill that space, we will be down to approximately 77% occupied. So we're just asking for the same opportunity as our direct competitor, Crescent Ridge 2, and we're willing to follow the same specifications as the approved second sign next door. It is just more of a proactive measure for us, so we wouldn't typically give exterior building signage to anyone under a certain threshold of square feet. But as employers work to bring employees back to the office, they do want to foster an on-site culture that draws their employees back into the office. One of the ways that they look to do this is branding through building signage. One of the hurdles that we're finding in this current market is time. It is of the essence with deals in the current market. And while we don't have a specific prospect with a sign requirement, you never know when a requirement may occur. It is incredibly beneficial in our leasing efforts to have the sign approved proactively rather than reactively. And it's been increasingly hard to compete with surrounding cities such as Plymouth, Golden Valley, and St. Louis Park, as they may allow for a greater amount of exterior building signage. Thus, our direct competitors of the building may have a competitive advantage when it comes to signage rate offerings. We do realize that one of the concerns of the additional signage is detracting from aesthetics of the surrounding area. And as the two sister buildings are significant in size with large facades, we do not feel the additional sign will be overwhelming or take away from the appeal of the community. There are several increased or benefits to the community with increased occupancy at our building. It generates employment, the occupancy drives the building value, and in turn, the real estate taxes to support the local school district and the city's infrastructure. It also increases activity of surrounding retailers, entertainment, restaurants, et cetera, and supports the housing and lodging development. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Alrighty, great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Minion, you have a question?
Can you tell me who owns Cushman Wakefield?
It's an Italian family.
Thank you.
That's all I know.
Do you need their address too?
Yeah.
Wasn't sure if there was a conflict, so I just wanted to define it.
Fair enough. I appreciate your thoroughness. Yeah, Commissioner Waterman.
In our pack, there's a table of some of the current occupancy, the current tenants. So I know Alaris is currently there and moving. That's 21,000 square feet. And then there's vacant space, the 40,000 square feet. Is that 40,000 contiguous? Okay, so that's all.
It is
of it.
not. No.
So the idea is this would be for probably the 21,000
Correct.
square feet. Okay.
Yeah.
Which this gets to I'm kind of curious as to the size of where they're moving. But thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Henry, you have a question?
Oh, sure. Thanks for the presentation. Can you confirm that the 21,000 square feet, if occupied in its entirety, would be the second largest tenant in the building?
I believe it would be. Let me. I'm pretty sure that's accurate.
Are you wondering if that tenant would get the sign?
We do have one other tenant on third floor that's approximately the same size as the Alaris space. The Alaris space is 21,743, and we have a tenant named HCC, which is 21,825.
Does that answer your question?
That answers it perfectly. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Commissioner Banks has a question.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation and the information. So the sign for this this area here, would it be for the second largest tenant in the building? Or you mentioned a threshold of square footage. As long as any tenant would meet that threshold, would that be the case for that tenant?
It would definitely be, anything larger. We don't usually like to give it away anyways. I'd say 15,000 or less we usually don't even consider that, giving those rights away for that.
Okay. So you would have a process in place if, like I see here, you have two tenants over 15,000, could potentially have a third if someone takes over the Alaris space. So you have potentially three tenants. How would you work that out if the threshold is just over 15,000 square feet?
Well, we'd go with the largest tenant. I mean, ideally, it'd be the second largest tenant in the building.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? It doesn't look like it, but we may have more for you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. All right, we will open the public hearing, and if anyone would like to come forward and offer any comments on this item, now is the time for that. I'm guessing there's no one on the phone for this item then? Thank you for coming in also. Appreciate it. We'll close the public hearing. Ms. Thomas, did you get an answer?
I do. The tenant space that Alaris will occupy or is going to occupy in the Easterly building is 34,654 square feet.
Sounds good. Great. Commissioners, any final questions? Otherwise, I think we're probably ready for comments. I wasn't at the meeting for the Easterly discussion, unfortunately, but I did read the notes. So yeah, Commissioner Henry.
I do have another question for Ashley. So if you would like to
Come on back up.
You mentioned that it's a competitive disadvantage for you to not have the ability to proactively have a sign in place to attract another tenant.
Right.
You also said that if the tenant would come in, you'd like to have them occupy what would be looks like the third largest, second largest, or sorry, it would be the third largest in that building. You also said that you ideally would like to have that sign go to the second largest tenant in the building, which is already, as of now, it's existing in there. So it seems like there's a little bit of a conflict in that you want to have that sign space to attract somebody, but then they would not get that sign space. So can you help us justify that, please?
Yep. Yes. So on the 5th floor, which is where Alaris is at currently, there are some smaller tenants that we are able to relocate should we get someone that's a larger size to come in, potentially taking a whole floor plate. Also, the HCC space that I mentioned, they're up for renewal next year, and they are potentially looking to downsize. So there is a potential for a tenant to, or our need to backfill that space as well. So we have a couple larger spaces coming up, and as I stated, we would ideally give it to the larger of the two spaces. So, we would make sure to, follow any protocol for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, comments? What do we think? Does anyone have an opinion they'd like to share? Love to hear what you're thinking. Who'd like to go first? Commissioner Henry, you're ready.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks to Ashley for the presentation. Thanks for the city for the recommendation. And in looking over the notes from last year, as commissioners, we remember a lot of these things vividly, including this one. And looking over the notes, I remember that myself and several other of the commissioners were hesitant about this. We ultimately approved the second sign in the other building because we did not want to set a precedent. And several of us also noted that, well, if we approve this, then sure enough, people in the other building would want to have that just for the name of equity and competition. I think we were told then that the buildings were not owned by the same group. So from the principle of fairness, and I think it makes sense to have two signs in there. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there were some unique circumstances about the second building, in that the other building was more aligned with 394, so people could see the building more from the road. That was one of the things that the building owners pointed out anyway, and a lot of us agreed with it. Something else that's different was that the Alaris potential occupant was moving in there, contingent on having that sign. It's a much larger space, and I am hesitant to blanket approve over what the city recommends, which, like we always say, the city does a really good and thoughtful job about trying to maintain what the city should be and to have it develop in a smart way for the betterment of all the community. So again, I'm torn with this one because in the name of equity, I think it makes sense to have it, but there are different circumstances to this versus the previous approval last year. And I'm inclined to not be in favor of this because there is no tenant and it's in a beautiful location. Our city is a beautiful place to do business. If I were an employee and somebody had an office in this building, I would jump at the chance to work there. So I don't think that it's a severe competitive disadvantage to not have a sign approval in place. I don't take variances willy-nilly. I take them very seriously. And the other one, there were specific reasons why I decided ultimately to approve it. This one, I don't see that compelling of a case to do so. So while I am torn, I will be not inclined to agree with the applicant in this case.
Great, thank you. Other opinions? Other thoughts? Commissioner Banks, what do you think?
Thanks, Chair. Certainly agree with a very large percentage of Commissioner Henry's thoughts and his comments. Yeah, we did struggle with this last year, and it's always difficult to find fault with whatever the staff recommends because they do their homework. They certainly provide a lot of great information, and but for this particular building, for me, it's the fact that we have two buildings. To the naked eye, they're pretty much the same, very similar. But unfortunate that there's two different owners, two different management companies, and really unfortunate that you're losing a tenant, and then as you drive to work, or management company drives to work, you have to see that tenant's name on the other building. And we live in a different world now. A lot of people work remote. People are downsizing. Companies are downsizing. So I do think that whatever advantage we could provide, I think we should. Now, that being said, that's not an open invitation for everyone in the city to request a signage change to buildings. But what I find unique about this is that the building next to you that looks very similar to yours will have a sign. And so to keep that uniform and to keep that, hopefully, that advantage for you to get a really good tenant in there, I would go against what the city is recommending, and I would approve that you would have it, just because I think it's not the same situation as the last time. There was a lot of mitigating factors last time. However, for me, just the fact that the buildings are so similar, they're very close, that's enough for me to say, if we can just keep them in terms of, your sign will be the same size, same height, same location, basically. That's, for me, that would be good enough to say, I would go against what the city is recommending and would approve to have the sign there. So.
Great, thank you. Other comments? Yeah, Commissioner Waterman, what do you think?
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with the comments already made. It's a tough one. It's funny when we're thinking about signs, you can really split hairs, and I'm kind of on that knife edge as well. Definitely don't want to start a whole bunch of precedent setting, but also want to help encourage businesses and new business to come to Minnetonka. I wrestled with this one last time, as did we, and I was comfortable with the conclusion that we came to, that two signs on this, I don't think it sets I think it's aesthetically doesn't make much of a difference, and it's entirely because these buildings are so massive and they are on the 394 corridor, and I got pretty comfortable with that it wouldn't, at least it shouldn't set a precedent that that would be applied to every office building. If I recall, I think that this might be incorrect, but the signage ordinances apply to all office buildings regardless of the size. So that's why I think it was unique in this situation, and I'm fairly comfortable in this situation as well, mirroring that, basically saying, yeah, this building could have this second sign. It doesn't sound like we had some specific limitations or caveats in what we ultimately proscribed, but just recognizing that because of the unique nature here. So I think I'll vote against the ordinance, or the sign plan, but I would be in favor of that. I think we have to potentially propose approving their sign plan. So,
Okay,
thanks.
great, thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Maxwell, what do you think?
I wasn't here for the last one, and I was a little bit surprised to see that it passed. But I think that now, given that this is a reasonable request, yes, there are some differences between the two buildings, but because of the similarities, the symmetry, and the appearance, I think makes this unique to this particular site and would not then be setting a precedent spread throughout the city. While I don't necessarily buy the applicant's argument that having a sign on the building would draw employees away from their comfortable homes and their pajamas into the office, I do see that it would potentially be an advantage for a tenant to want to rent this space compared with other cities or other nearby areas, and in interest of being a city that will attract business, particularly when there is a large amount of vacant office space around right now. I think it makes sense to approve this one today.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Minion?
I think sounds like we're of the same heart. We're not big fans of the signs, and And I have to say for myself, I like the code and I like the position of the city. But one thing that is unique about this is how often do we have two buildings that look so close aesthetically, and they balance each other. I am not a fan of signs, but I do think that this scale that it shows still presents well. It's still a nice, attractive looking building. And if we can help our businesses be successful, if this is a tool to help rent or make it more available to other tenants, you know, like we've discussed, it's the commercial culture. Real estate has really been hit hard with a number of downsizes. If we can help somebody to be more competitive in the market, I think it's a good thing. So I'll be supporting the sign and not voting for the city's position. But I think the Pandora's box has been opened, unfortunately. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's I like not having more signs, but I think I'll be voting for the sign.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll offer my final comments. I agree. I really do appreciate our sign ordinance. We don't want too many. We don't want too big. I just have a different opinion that this is not too many and they're not too big. So I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Minion just said. I think the good news is with variances, we can take them on a case-by-case basis. So I don't think this opens us up. Again, approving the one on the east definitely set a precedent for the one on the west, but I think it kind of is a pretty steep drop-off after that. So I'm not worried about Pandora's box being fully open, but also Minnetonka doesn't have a ton of commercial office space, and it is a tough market. So anything we can do right now to help that, I would much rather have an additional sign than empty office buildings. I think that is a much smaller price for the city to pay. And if that's what it takes, I'm willing to do that within reason. So it sounds like we're mostly on board, maybe not unanimous, but that's okay. That's why we're here. So Ms. Thomas, is it okay if we maybe craft a resolution that's different than what's said here? So maybe look for a motion to adopt the resolution approving the amendment to the sign plan for Crescent Ridge Corporate Center as it pertains to 11100 Wayzata Boulevard. Does that work?
Yep, and if I may, the findings
yep.
for that approval that I thought I heard were that the subject property is located on I-394. The existing building is 275,000 square feet in size, and the second sign would maintain uniformity and visual balance with the building to the east. Okay. And may I also offer two suggested conditions?
Sure. Suggest away, and we'll comment.
That they would be the same as the conditions applied to the building to the east, simply that the sign has to be the 5 feet in height, which was proposed by the applicant in your change memo this evening, and that it would be this as proposed here. There had been another potential location on the top of the building, but again, to maintain that uniformity, that it would be in this location.
Perfect. And I think this is not the time probably to litigate this, but I think at over still 100,000 square feet per sign, that seems pretty darn reasonable, in my opinion. This is just, I'm going back to opinion for half a second here, as opposed if we had a 30,000 square foot building and 8 signs. I'm comfortable with, again, a sign per 100,000 square feet. I'm just making this up. Seems pretty reasonable to me. But all right, so we heard the motion. Would someone like to make the motion with the conditions that Ms. Thomas laid out?
So I'll make the motion to,
Adopt the resolution.
but I just want to make sure, adopting the resolution, approving the sign plan proposal, including the conditions Ms. Thomas laid out.
Nailed it.
Actually, before we
Yeah.
go for the vote,
Sure.
Ms. Thomas, could you confirm, looking at the notes from last year's meeting, we talked about that this was dependent on the sign of the tenant being the second largest tenant in the building? Can you confirm that? And if so, can we make also that a condition of this approval?
The Chair and Commissioner Henry, I'm reading from the resolution that was ultimately signed by the Chair that was crafted at the last meeting. So the findings were, the subject property is located on I-394. The existing building is over 300,000 square feet in size. And, oh, shoot. I typed over it.
Probably this.
It was Alaris Bank would be the second largest tenant in the building. Those were the findings for approval. The conditions were the second wall sign must be no greater than 5 feet in height, and the second wall sign must be in general conformance with the location.
Which we have here. and
Which we
what's-
have here.
What's been proposed, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I understand, and certainly up for discussion with the commission, I understand where you're going with that. Commissioner Henry,
I think we could cite it as a finding, but as a condition that might be tough. But I don't know. What do we think? Because I guess I personally don't care if it's the second or third largest tenant, as long as there's only 2 signs, right?
But-
And they're not too big. Like that's what I'm most.
Yeah, me too. I mean, just
concerned
taking
about.
a leap of faith with just
Yeah.
not even knowing the tenant, there will only be
I just
2.
don't care
Yeah.
which one it is. Yeah, Commissioner Maxwell.
Yeah, I think if we made it a condition of the second largest, there could be too much swapping of the sign, right? If, say, a tenant leaves and then another one comes in and combines spaces, and then it'll switch over, and then you get arguing between tenants and trying to buy another property to get your sign, or just construction to switch out the signs as
Right.
a bigger space moves in.
And then also the building to the east, then they don't have that. They don't have that condition. It was part of the findings. We're getting really into the weeds here on our planning. But Commissioner Henry, what are your thoughts on the differences between the condition versus the finding?
In last year's meeting, we did have it as a finding and not a condition. So to be consistent, it
Okay.
does make sense, reasonable, that it would be similar for this one.
All right, I wasn't there, so I don't know the tone of the meeting, but I take your word for it. So, all right. So,
Chair,
yes, please, Ms. Thomas.
is that a friendly amendment to add that as a finding then? That the sign is intended for the second largest tenant?
I think we've talked about it here, so it's in the notes of it, and
yeah.
it seems reasonable that it would be, but I also agree with fellow commissioners that I don't want to see squabbling over a couple square feet here and there causing custody of the sign to switch from one to the other. That's just
Well
ripe for
put.
conflict, and
Well
we don't
put.
need that.
All right. So, finding, not condition. Does that work? Everyone good? All right. So I think you got the motion out. Motion by Waterman.
Second?
Second, Banks. Staff, please poll the commission.
Minion,
Yes.
Waterman,
Yes.
Banks,
Yes.
Henry,
No.
Maxwell,
Yes.
Sewell.
Yes, motion carries. And this is a final decision, subject to appeal within writing within 10 days of this meeting. Good luck with the signs. All right, moving along to item number 9, adjournment. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Motion, Waterman.
I'll second.
Second, Henry. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Good night.